Welcome to Off Panel.
Welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of comics like Secret Wars, the Marvel Legacy One-Shot, and the upcoming Image series Versus. It's Esad Ribić. Thanks for coming on, Esad.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk all about Versus, your new project with Ivan Brandon, Nick Klein, and a slew of others. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about your path to the book. I tend to do that on my show. You're from Croatia. You have a background working in animation and studying art, but I'm curious, like, how did you end up working in American comics? Like, what was your path there?
Well, I started as an animator, well, in betweener first, and then I started doing backgrounds and animation after a while for an animation company. But then we basically had, so at that time I was just amateur with comics, I saw myself as professional animator,
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing some illustration and comics on the side, but 90% of what I was doing was that. Then we had a war in like early 90s, and basically one of the first casualties of war was animation in Croatia. Like the studios we had just folded all within a year. So I was kind of left with my hobbies
Mm-hmm.
as a second career, and started working on that stuff. But Croatia is a very small market, so you couldn't really make a living just doing comics. So you would tend to do everything, like illustrations, design, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I've assumed that I basically achieved like professional level, something that I might go and sell abroad, because I wanted to specialize into comics. And I started sending my portfolios abroad. I was actually aiming for France, because most of the comics I grew up on are French and Spanish stuff, European comics. But I did send some stuff to States. It just so happened that I got offered a work from States, but nothing from France. So I started working in US. And that's how I ended up first in DC Vertigo and Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a short story.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, I feel like a lot of people know you for your painted background. Like you painted yourself on Silver Surfer Requiem. You've done that on several projects. I'm At what point did you start painting yourself? Like, was that something you always did? Was that just a passion?
Well, here's the thing. Like when I started doing comic books, first couple of those things were like one page, like just a goofing off. Those were black and white. But the soon I started my first serious comic book, I started painting it. I was always into that stuff. So for me, black and white was always kind of like plan B.
Right.
I never really had a thought process for good black and white, I would say. So, black and white was really always for me like a plan B. Like I will always go for painted, but if for whatever reason publishers don't want painted, I will offer black and white too.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's always been like the case with me. So whenever I get a chance, I will paint.
Mm-hmm. Well, I read that, I was reading some interviews you'd done in the past, and I read that, this makes sense given your interest in the French market, but, Mobius is one of your big influences. Frank Frazetta is another one. Frank Frazetta makes a lot of sense as far as the painted influences are concerned. But, I am kind of curious. You said that a lot of your influences were outside of comics for your own work. Like, what are some of the notable influences that you look to outside of the world of comics that helped you kind of find and refine your voice? Like, was it more film? film? Was it books? Was it art? Or like magazine illustrations? What was it?
Well, there's like three main things apart from the stuff you already said. Renaissance painters, especially Caravaggio, uh, uh, American Brandywine School of Illustrators, and movies.
Mm.
You know, in which order I'm not sure. Like I would guess that every time I do a piece, there's something else of that stuff that comes through as a most important influence. I don't analyze that stuff. I just do it and then.
Sure.
But the thing is, when I started reading comics as a kid, I started reading illustrated books and stuff. I was never just a comics guy,
Right.
I would read a comic and then I would look at the, book with illustrations and stuff like that. To me, that stuff was always like kind of like almost one medium, So that's how I always approached it when I started working. I started working first as a illustrator because at that time my comics were not exactly professional level, but I was good with illustration already. So I started making money doing, painted illustrations or occasionally black and white for like newspapers and stuff like that here in Croatia. So, it's just a matter of here in Croatia, you just have to do a lot of other stuff. You can't just, specialize in anything. And it was never a problem for me because I liked all the other stuff. So,
yeah, I do think it's interesting where, I think once upon a time, like a lot of artists coming from Croatia would seem like a far-fetched idea. I mean, I have to say I'm from Alaska, which is pretty far away from the main comic scene as well. But I mean, like, there's Goran Parlov, there's Igor Korde, there's Goran Sudzuka. There's a ton of like really excellent working artists who are from Croatia and continue to live in Croatia, from what I understand. Like, what is the Croatian comic scene like? Do you feel like it's really developed in recent years as, I guess, the internet has made it all a lot more viable?
It's not really developed. Here's what the thing is. If you know a little bit of history, like we used to be part of a bigger country called Yugoslavia. That was in that war ended. And in Yugoslavia, there was like a big, actually, comics industry. It was 25 million people market. Comics were very popular, and you could make a living doing comics. But when I started, like I published my first piece in like '89 or something. It was just the end of that thing, So after war, what we were left with is like 6 new states with the too small a market to survive.
Right.
So basically, if you notice, like all of these people are basically remnants of that scene that was pretty high level, After Croatia, it's a little bit different thing. Like there's a couple of kids that are younger that started doing some work abroad, but they're more influenced by some other stuff. Like I would say there's not a local color there anymore. Their stuff looks like anybody else's stuff from all around the world, just international style, let's say. So it's different now. Yeah.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I think we're kind of seeing that here to a certain degree, but it sounds like because of the Yugoslavian comic scene that you guys kind of all had like a similar feel, and it's like the new generation is more influenced by something else.
Yeah.
So
mostly American stuff.
Mostly American stuff?
Yeah, mostly American stuff and video games. So there's a difference there because back home here we had like some comic artists that we all loved a lot that you probably never heard of, and we mixed those influences with some foreign stuff, obviously. but that was like kind of glue to, certain type of style that was a bit different than what you could see in some other markets.
So the last question I want to ask before we get into verses was I was reading an interview that you did where you said that that you're not really that interested in characters. You find stories more interesting above characters. I'm curious, like what does that mean for how you approach your art? Like, does that change your work at all, or does it mostly kind of impact the kinds of projects you take on?
Well, let's put it this way. Like, I always start my scenes from mise en scène, what you might call backgrounds here. So I would, come up with the scene, and then I would basically have characters react to the scene and each other. So basically, I don't start from whatever happens with characters. I start from that. That kind of gives it maybe a bit more cinematic feeling. I don't know. But this way you get a little bit different result than if you start, if your thought process is character driven. I do try to put a lot of, character in characters and, have them act and stuff like that. But I always try to come from like geography of where they are and stuff like that, as opposed to, from just characters alone.
That's really interesting. I've talked to a lot of artists, and I don't know if I've ever heard one who starts in that situation. Like, I actually, if I remember correctly, there's one prominent artist who basically will go through the book and draw like each character in each panel throughout, like individuals, and then move on to the next character, and then move on to the next character, and then eventually get to backgrounds. But it actually makes a lot of sense that you kind of start in the mise en scene, because that's just how your work kind of looks.
Yeah, if I did that, I would just do backgrounds and then add characters in them.
So let's talk about verses. In the press release for its first issue, you said, and I quote, "Making verses is a dream. After all these years, it feels great to be able to create my own world and tech from scratch." You've been in Marvel for a while now. I think it's like 14 years, maybe longer. Why did you go the creator-owned route, and what was it about this project in particular that appealed to you?
Well, here's the thing. There's like, I really liked it in Marvel for a lot of years. And after a couple of years where I was just doing fill-ins and stuff like that, I got to do like books that I really saw as creator owned in everything but copyright, because
Right.
we were really able to do whatever we wanted with those Marvel Knights books, painted ones. I'm especially proud with the Submariner, which was hardest thing to do, because I don't think anybody tried to do like painted book about 4 guys in 2 rooms shouting at each other for 120 pages. So that was great. And then when I crossed into the Marvel continuity books, I got really lucky with stuff I really liked. So I always at some point wanted to do some creator-owned stuff, and just to have whole control of visuals and everything. But I was having it too well in Marvel, so urge wasn't really strong. And then after, basically after Secret Wars, I decided that I really wanted to take a break, because that was insane amount of work to do. Like, I broke all of my records for, basically I've done like 240 pages in like 9 months. And people don't know that when we started, the book was like, certain size. And by the end of it, there was like 60 pages extra.
Right.
So, it was, you can imagine, very stressful. So basically, after I stopped, after I finished it, I decided to take a break from Marvel for a while. And, that was a chance for me and Ivan to do something. We were talking about something for years, really, and we started doing Versus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love the first issue. I apparently haven't read the completed version yet, but I mean, it's really coming together amazing. But I am, I'm kind of curious about collaborators. You mentioned you'd want to work with Ivan for a while. In the past, you've worked with names like Jason Aaron and Jonathan Hickman very prominently. Now you're working with Ivan, who is a friend of yours. How much do your collaborators change your experience on a book and your interest in a book?
It's hard to tell. From one side, I never really change my approach.
Right.
I take the script, break it down, usually start from background, as I say, and then fill in the characters into the world. Let's say. But every writer has their own style, and you tend to react differently to some of those beats,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure that my approach is not the same with everybody, really. But I'm not really aware of that. I'm not analyzing it, so couldn't really tell you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I know on a lot of Marvel projects in particular, it's not like you're talking to Jason or Jonathan on a daily basis. Ivan, or I mean, you might be talking to Ivan more often, but it probably wouldn't impact your work. But I am curious about like your process on Versus. One of the things that I think is really interesting about it is, in the past you said that you prefer painting yourself, but you also do black and white work where you put in Photoshop notes and things like that. Versus you're being painted over by Nick Klein. You've said like I said in the past, you've had two different styles. Is this different at all for you with somebody else painting you, and how you actually go through the process of creating your art?
Well, here's the thing. What I do with those black and white pages is I will do fine pencil artwork,
Mm-hmm.
scan it in the computer, and then do a grayscale in Photoshop,
Mm-hmm.
where I will, basically render light and shade, depth, perspective, and stuff like that myself. So when the colorist gets it, it's not that hard to make it look painted, because it looks kind of almost painted in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same process I did in Thor, Secret Wars, and some other stuff. Nick has a thicker style, so basically it looks more painted than what a regular colorist would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main difference. But really, still most of the rendering you will see is mine, but it's only black and white. So it's kind of done in a way where you can't really tell who did what, which is something I like. One thing I don't really like, even though I like some artists who work like that, is like a regular black and white plus Photoshop style,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, okay, this guy, he did that, and then some other guy or girl took over, and they did the rest. With stuff I'm doing, I'm trying to make it look more organic, all the way down to like you're not being exactly sure who did what,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I would get criticisms all the time, like, oh man, this guy is so lazy, like his colorists are doing his background. That's because they don't see that I rendered those backgrounds in Photoshop,
Right.
not in pencil. So it shows on a page. It shows only as a color, not as a artwork.
Mm-hmm.
So they assume that colorists did it, but that's not the case, really.
Yeah, that's funny. I always think it's interesting how readers will assume that somebody did one thing when they didn't necessarily do that. It's like, people always say that writers do this, and they attribute some of these things that could be decisions by you or that you actually did that, to Ivan. Like, for a good example, I talked to Ivan about, there's a 2-page spread in the first issue of Versus where it's like this just huge look at the roadscape of the future world that we're dealing with, and it's incredible. I think it's an astonishing look at what this future looks like. And Ivan said he basically wrote a car ride in the script, but I mean, who am I to tell whether or not you came up with that, if Ivan came up with it, or what? But Ivan said you just took that and ran with it.
Well, the thing is, as I said, I wanted to introduce the city. To me, the city is really main character in this book. So I wanted to introduce it as fast as possible. One thing you didn't see is I did a couple of pages of prologue that are still tinkering with. Basically starts with like a zoom in on the city. So basically, once you get down to, seeing first character, you already went through a little bit of it. So it's just reinforcing the thing that it's people are almost like fleas on the body of this huge animal that is the city, Again, coming from the background, thing, not the character thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is kind of interesting because, you described like the city itself almost like a character, but at the same time, I mean, it does an incredible job of establishing that world and just kind of that we're dealing with something different. And I do think it's amazing that you took a pretty simple page description and turned it into something that's like astonishing, really.
Oh, thank you. But that's your chance, really, because if there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen on a page, you can't fit in a huge vista. So you kind of wait for a writer to drop the ball a little bit. Oh, okay, then just driving across. Oh, now I'm gonna do something, So it's you're waiting for your chances where you can put that stuff, because none of that stuff really needs to be in a script. That's it's something you just add, and it's implied that basically writer deals with characters more than me. I have to draw them, and I have to breathe life into them, have to make them act, but I mostly make them act stuff that are in a script. But the backgrounds, the mise en scène, that's me, So I never really liked writers, going into that too much, because if they're too exact with the backgrounds, then I can't express what I want, So it's just preference, I would guess.
Yeah, it gives you more freedom to do the things that you really love about the art. I did want to ask about, I talked with Ivan a couple of days ago about that spread in particular, and he was talking about how, when I mentioned that page in particular, he said, how everything in the world of Versus works, despite it being in the future. Like, how much do you research and think out elements like that when it comes to worlds you're bringing to life?
Well, your whole life is research, really. Let's put it this way: like the way I envisioned this city when we started talking about that stuff, like you kind of extrapolate the trends that you see from last, like I would say, 150 years, and trends everybody converging into cities that grow more and more. So we took this to a logical extreme where you ended up with, 10 or 12 huge mega cities on the world, and the rest of the Earth is like almost uninhabited. It's just went back to the Stone Age, because since we have this space travel and they are basically mining the asteroids that they put in orbit of Earth, they get all of their, stuff that they need from orbit. So they don't really need countries, so you don't have countries anymore. And not just that, but, in this future, we kind of envision that it's the return of the Ice Age. So it's kind of implied maybe those cities were built like that as a response to the coming of Ice Age. Uh, so you play with those things, because once you come up with those concepts like that, once you add the different climate that they're living in, then a lot of other stuff just writes itself. It's, to me, it's pretty straightforward process. And I like macroeconomics and stuff like that anyways, so a lot of that shit is just influenced by me reading all kinds of stuff that's probably totally unnecessary, but it's fun for me. And the thing is, AI, basically one of the more important elements of the book is AI and what it does, how it functions, and stuff like that. So it's just once you have a chance to do your own project, you try to put as much stuff you're interested in as you can, and I guess we've done a lot of that, so hopefully it's not going to be too much for people. Maybe they'll just read it and find it. Oh, this is so tedious. Fucking hell. No, we'll see.
I somehow doubt it, but it seems like the world building elements of Versus to you are something that is particularly enjoyable.
Yes.
Is like I'm always curious. Like it seems like on other projects you might have done that you kind of get dropped onto the project and you get a time to like kind of develop the look and feel of the world a little bit. But on Versus, did you have more time to kind of build out that world before you even got into the issues itself and the pages itself?
Yes. After I finished Secret Wars, I really didn't do a shit for a while because I had to rest. But then I was thinking a lot about what I want to do and came up with all this stuff that I just told you, like how the world should function and stuff like that. And, when Ivan started sending me script, I already had like shitload of ideas, about this. So it was down to like, okay, what do I do? I can do this, I can do that, I can do 12 different things here. What do I need here? What will tell the most with the least, let's put it that way. So we'll see how successful I was with that. But, the thing is, I'm a big fan of old school sci-fi, like Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, that kind of stuff, and I really tried to imbue this thing with a little bit of a feel of that old school sci-fi. This new sci-fi is totally different stuff, and I'm not exactly a fan.
So I guess that's maybe. Do you feel like the older stuff was more influenced by kind of where the world is actually coming from? Like it's because you were describing like how you built out the world, like you kind of looked at like the last 150 years of trends and then you thought that out to natural progression for Versus. Like is that something that like appeals to you, or what is it about that previous sci-fi that appeals to you more about the newer stuff?
Well, a lot of that stuff had an epic scope, but it was, they were like, especially Isaac Asimov. I don't know if you're familiar with his Foundation series. That stuff is like that's like, I don't know, 9 books or something like that, and it spans like 500 years. So the main character in first 2 books, he's like a legend in the third book. Somebody else is main character, So it's like really and it's really based on decline and fall of Roman Empire, and basically there was this, after Roman Empire fell, there was Dark Ages, and then after that there was Renaissance, and basically whole uh, foundation book is basically based on this idea that somebody saw the future and realized that civilization is going to break up, and then started doing things to speed up the process of it rising up again. So we don't have 1,000 years of dark ages. That's the idea for that book. So it's very high concept. That's kind of stuff I really like. And that's missing in a modern sci-fi, I would say. Like the last guy that did it well was Ian Banks. I don't know if about that guy, British guy. He died sadly. But in the last 20 years, like the stuff I read, I can't say I really find any of that. Most of it is like getting closer and closer to soap opera, you know. So it's just I don't know, not for me.
It's not for you. Okay, so
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about you had kind of talked about like the bigger moments, and one of the things I think is interesting about your work is you're perhaps most well known for these epic visions of worlds and moments in comics and in your art. But do you have a preference? Like, do you have any real preference as to whether or not you're working on something at a larger scale versus, like that 2-page spread versus tackling smaller moments like Sata Flynn, like engaging in the hospital or anything like that? Is there a preference for you as to what you're kind of working on, or is it just all part of a larger whole?
Well, here's the thing. If you're presented with a story, and you really like that story, even if it's not something that might be up your alley, you will maybe decide to still do it and try to adapt to it. For example, that Submariner book that I did. So that's a drama that's happening in just 2 rooms and 1 corridor in a small submarine.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's not exactly a material for a painted book, because when you do painted book, you expect it to be like full of color and blah blah blah. But that was a challenge for me, and I saw that it should be done in painted, because that way you can render all this shade and stuff like that, make it something terrifying, really, much better than with the regular style, black and white plus color, So it wasn't something up my alley, but after a while, I really enjoyed doing it. There's only so much ways you can show one fucking room, It becomes challenge. Like, okay, I used up all of my ideas for this. Now I need another idea. What have I never done in my life? Stuff like that. And it becomes just different kind of fun when you do it. There are some other stuff where I got offered stuff to do, and I would say, look, I don't think I'm a right guy for that. Like, I think it's great, but I'm not sure I would be able to make it good, so I would just say no to that. So it depends. Like, if you read something and it gives you, ideas, then, then you should probably do it. It's pretty simple that. If you read something, it doesn't give you ideas, then you shouldn't do it, I would say. Even though it might be like good for your career or whatever. Like, a lot of stuff that I didn't want to do were like pretty big projects, that would, I guess, make me a star or whatever. But I decided not to do it because I didn't see I was the guy who was able to offer what that thing needs.
Did working on Submariner, which was a great book, and if I remember correctly, like that was it was mostly just basically variations on black, because it was in the deep water and everything like that, and it was very
Exactly, yeah.
If I remember, like it had a really claustrophobic feel to it, which was really impressive, because that's kind of hard to do in comics.
Exactly, that's the thing.
Was there a part of you after doing that project where it was something that wasn't obviously something that you would think that you could succeed in? Like, did part of that like make you more interested in trying more outside the box projects, or was that just so dependent on Peter's like story being something that you found interesting?
No, it was just down to story. Peter Milligan wrote it, and it was just, I like Joseph Conrad and like a lot of that, old 19th century adventure, stuff, and it had a little bit of that feeling to it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was mostly horror drama, and he made it like that in the script, but I amplified it into that direction. So I made it more horror feeling than it was in the script,
Yeah.
Exactly, so I could basically get you to get claustrophobic, because whenever I do a book where I have enough control, I would go for a certain effect that's maybe not in a script, like when we were doing Silver Surfer book, Requiem. I don't know if you read that one.
I did, yeah.
The idea was, what Requiem is. It's a mass for dead, and it was done in an elegiac way where it would be like more about feeling than anything else. And I really tried to strategically do it in such a way that it would try to make you cry, which is not easy, with comics either, So, I always come up with some kind of, ulterior motive for myself on every book I do, where I will try to do something with it that's not necessarily in a script, but if you're successful, then it will arise almost unconsciously, okay, well, I just read something, but it tells me something else, not just the stuff I read, metaphors,
Yeah.
And that's always what I'm going for. I fall flat a lot of times, but then sometimes I succeed. So,
I do distinctly remember both of those books hitting the mark. I mean, I'm naturally really afraid of open water and like the deep sea. So reading the Submariner book was pretty horrifying for me because I guess I'd never really seen anybody approach that character as kind of a horror threat, which it really would be. I mean, if you ever came across him, it would be pretty nightmarish. And then like I remember the not to spoil a book that's like 10 or 12 years old, but like the funeral scene at the end of Requiem was genuinely a very sad moment in terms of the history of comics. It was very well done. So there you go.
That's what we were for, really. We discarded certain elements of the story where we decided that it would kill the feeling,
Right.
Because you have to juggle between the narration and a feeling, So at some point, if you have too much narration, too much stuff happening in the story, it will kill the feeling you're trying to evoke. So, it's a kind of black art, let's say.
So I just want to go back to Versus for a few more questions about your process. The painting stuff is really interesting to me, especially because I reread the interview that we had done several years back, and it was a question I actually asked you was, could you ever see yourself being painted by somebody else? You at the time you told me you couldn't really imagine it, especially because you had been by Richard Isanove, and it just didn't really jive with what you like to see your work painted as. Nick is painting over you, at least digitally. Did you and Nick work together to find the right solution for how he'd handle like painting your line art, like in a way that worked satisfactorily for both of you? Or was it more just like Nick's a great artist and you just trusted him to do his work?
Well, here's the thing. Certain aspects of what Nick does are pure Nick.
Mm-hmm.
So, other aspects of what he did are basically me.
Sure.
In those grayscales. So there were a couple of places where I had to, redo some details because it's not his cup of tea. So he didn't really know what to do with it, and I did because I did it. I came up with, the things, so I would know exactly what to do there. But there, that was, in the first issue. In the second issue, there's much less of that, and it's gelling much more. But that's the thing is, it's very easy to gel with somebody who doesn't really have a strong style. It's a bit harder to somebody who has a strong style, So I don't know. I think my style is kind of strong. Like it's obviously me, and his style is strong too. So gelling those two things, it's not as straightforward as gelling with, I don't know, a good colorist, regular colorist, So there was a little bit of, back and forth and stuff like that. But most of it is really, let's put it this way, it was very uneventful. We tried a couple of other colorists, and we weren't really happy. So when Nick took over, it was just, looks good. There's still, so I expected that I would have much more work on the pages, than what I did. But he did it really well, and there was only a couple of really small details that I, redid and stuff like that. So it was actually surprisingly easy. I got to say.
You mentioned earlier about how you whoever's coloring you to kind of have an organic kind of complementary feel. And it's with you guys both having strong styles, do you find that as you're moving further into the book, into the second issue and beyond and everything like that, that you guys are kind of jiving better and that that kind of organic feel is starting to be realized in the art?
Yeah, I think so. I think second issue looks a little bit better. From what's seen from third issue, looks a little bit better, and so it's developing nicely. I think that by the end of issue 5, it's gonna be perfect. But by then, nobody's gonna care about the book.
I beg to differ. How dare you? So I just have a couple more questions. I wanted to ask, you mentioned Secret Wars and how that was kind of a punishing schedule for you. I wanted to ask about schedule and its impact on art. Secret Wars, it was, I don't remember how many issues originally meant to be, but it had I think a couple issues added to its run. And beyond that, some of the issues were longer than typical Marvel comics. Like you said, I think there was 60 additional pages added.
Yeah.
It even double shipped for a time, which was strange because the schedule was all over the place. How does that kind of schedule impact your work and your ability to produce art that you're satisfied with?
Well, not very well. Let's put it this way. I came up with the idea how to do the Secret Wars, and basically what I wanted to do was, Dune. The book Dune by Frank Herbert. It was done in a really shitty movie back in the 80s. But Dune is you should really read the book. It's very opulent world and stuff like that. And that was plan A, which went out the window the moment I got the script. I got the script for second issue first, and instead of being 20 pages, it was 44 pages.
Oof.
So I was just okay, plan B.
No more Dune.
Cut off half of what you planned for the mise-en-scene, and stick with as much as you can still, put in, and that's what we ended up with. So that's just reality of that stuff. You can have all kinds of crazy ideas and whatnot, but once scheduling starts fucking with you, then you have to adapt to it.
I do think it's interesting. Like, there's a lot. I've read I've been writing about comics for like 8 or 9 years, and like, there's you see people say things like they chastise artists for not having like really in depth backgrounds or things like that. But one thing I think people forget is that like the release schedule for monthly comics is kind of is very punishing for artists, and like sometimes you have to cut certain elements, and the first thing to go is quite often depth to the art.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I got criticized for reusing backgrounds, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: on a monthly book, either I'm gonna not do a lot of elaborated backgrounds, or I'm gonna do them on separate paper and reuse them.
Sure.
So that way you have more of a feel of the world,
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically it. You can't just draw everything because you don't have enough time. So you have to come up with something to make up for that loss, And what I did was basically, to try to reuse whatever I can. So whenever I would get to do like elaborate background, I would do it on a separate paper,
Mm-hmm.
And put it in, in a computer, in a page,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can reuse the same thing couple of pages later, for the same scene. I will maybe do it from another angle, but the thing is that I would do 2 backgrounds and then I would use it like 6 times.
Right.
So that way I can have, a lot of elaborated backgrounds on a monthly book.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, no fucking way, because it will take me 2 months to do one issue,
Yeah. There's a comic I really like that actually recently, what the artist did, or the cartoonist, because he writes, draws, colors, does everything on the book, and still is hitting it monthly. He actually reused these clouds in the sky on every single panel, because there were clouds already, but there was no reason to recreate the wheels. So he even mentioned it in the letters column after the issue, because he was just like, I just ran out of time. I had to do that. And
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to do that. I mean, it gives the world depth without like really taking anything away from it. But I know in a perfect world you'd have all the time you could, but is there an ideal like rate of release for you to do your best work while still being able to kind of churn out comics, I guess?
No, because whatever the speed is, I manage to use up all the time and then get short, So if I have more time, I will use more time and do something that's very time consuming that nobody notices and stuff like that. But it's the way I see it has to be fun for me too.
Right.
It's just down to like some of those. Right now, I'm doing a painted book in France.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those pages would take like a week. It's a whole week for one page, A lot of it's real slow painting, huge spaceships and stuff like that. And I've done it in Marvel too. It's Silver Surfer, like some of those pages took like a week. So
Mm-hmm.
I would spend whole month and I would just do 4 pages,
Mm-hmm.
Not all of the pages. I would usually do 2 pages a week, but some of those pages were like so fucking complicated to do,
Yeah.
So, if I see that I can push for it, I will try to push for it. I actually always enjoyed doing the backgrounds, so I would do them more if I could.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that you kind of stretch to like whatever deadline you have. I talked to a colorist who said basically the same thing. Like if he had more time, he would just take that time to kind of, figure it out. Like it's like he would stretch to whatever length he actually has to work with. So having tighter time frames sometimes like just kind of strips out some of the, I don't want to say extraneous stuff, but the stuff that he wouldn't do otherwise. And it's funny how like we think that if you had like unlimited time, you would just do something completely different, but you wouldn't necessarily.
Well, here's the thing, though. If I had unlimited time, I probably wouldn't do a shit. So, talking about good deadlines where you have a lot of time, not unlimited time.
Yes, that is true. So the last question I have for you, I want to ask about a project that you did. You're a very busy man. You're not just doing Versus, and you weren't just doing Marvel Legacy, but you also did the French book that you're working on. But also, you did a Hawaii travel book for Louis Vuitton this year. And from what I understand, that was a particularly enjoyable project for you. I watched the video of you traveling around Hawaii, and it's easy to see for me why it would probably be an enjoyable project. But what was it about that project that appealed to you in particular?
Well, here's the thing. It's basically backgrounds, you know, and it's landscapes, and most of it is just more painterly stuff. I enjoy painting, Thor or Conan or whatever, as much as any other guy. But there's this part of what I like, which is just landscapes and stuff like that. So for me, that was a chance to do something that I didn't get a chance to do for a long time, just to do landscapes, you know. And that was very enjoyable. I gotta say that I had a rocky start with that because I haven't done it for so long that first couple of pieces I did, I just threw them away. They were garbage, because it's a use it or lose it thing. Like if you don't do it for a while, you forget how to do it. You concentrate on something else, and then it takes a while for it to get back to you. But once I was on it, it was really enjoyable.
I was just going to ask, like, is it nice to kind of like some of the stuff in there is a lot more illustrative than like the stuff you normally get to do, like. Is it nice to kind of stretch your legs in a different direction like that every once in a while?
Exactly. As I told you, like when I started my career, I was doing everything, and basically, when I became successful in States, I kind of got down only to doing comics, which after a while I started missing doing all the other stuff,
right?
Because I would do, illustrations for daily newspapers. I would do book covers. I would do all kinds of, stuff, commercial illustrations, something that somebody is going to put in some ad that's going to just be a piece of something else. And all of that stuff. It's a different kind of thinking, and it's a, different kind of fun, let's say. So I'm actually actively looking to do something else, not just comics. I mean, I love comics and I want to do them mostly, but then I want to do some other stuff too. That was a chance to do something else,
Well, it looks like a beautiful book, and Versus is as well. Esad, that is all I have for you. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast with artist Esad Ribić. You can find his work in the upcoming Versus from Image Comics coming February 7th. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Andrew Scott, Brian McRae, Ira James Adaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Hollers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nowell, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslick, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.